This here is another viewer's broken gaming PC. And as far as I'm aware, this one straight up does not turn on, which could be a number of things. So this is an AMD Ryzen-based machine, and the exact CPU I'm not too sure about yet, but we can clarify that later. We're gonna be swapping out the CPU cooler for a much beefier 360mm AIO from MSI, which we'll talk about in a second. Conveniently, there's also another MSI product in here, the GTX 1080 Gaming. This one is so good looking. I love the way these older MSI cards look. Even just the heat pipe design looks really nice. The red accents, it all comes together very nicely. We've got cable extensions in here, which I think are a nice touch. We do need to fix cable management just a bit. It's a bit cluttered, especially around these SATA ports. And well, the whole build is a bit dusty. This is a Corsair case, but you can tell that it really hasn't been cleaned in a good while. I'm not going to deep clean it in this video. That's not what I was given this rig to do, but I will clean it up certainly before returning it to the owner. Now, for those who are new to this playlist, the premise is simple. We reach out to folks in the local area that's in and around Orlando, Florida, and ask if they have broken systems that we can fix for free. We don't charge them a dime so long as they're okay with us taking on their systems for a few days and filming the process. We can monetize these videos. That's how I make money, and I don't feel like rolling over any of those costs onto the viewer who's already gracious enough to loan me his or her system for a few days. There are only two caveats. The first is that I do not guarantee I can fix the problem. I can typically at least figure out what's wrong, but I can't always replace the component that we find is dead. And the second thing is that they have to be, again, okay with how long this takes. Sometimes it could take upwards of a week, especially if I have to order something in, I have to wait for shipping, so do you in return. And occasionally we get asked by companies to promote products like these. This here is a Core Liquid K360. It is a 360mm all-in-one liquid cooler from MSI, and they asked us to not only promote it in this video, but also upgrade a viewer in the process. So this person's gonna get to swap out that smaller tower style air cooler with a beefy liquid cooler. We're gonna talk more about this later in the video when we install it, but you can find it linked below if you are interested. I think this one's gonna be a fun one to troubleshoot and repair. I'm not actually confident in really any of my assumptions at this point. If it doesn't turn on, it could be any number of things. It could be something very simple, could be something rather catastrophic. Hoping that it's not the graphics card. That's the one thing I can't immediately replace, but we'll cross that bridge when we come to it. And then the simple stuff like swapping out the CPU cooler and cleaning this thing up. I think that's going to be the icing on the cake, assuming we can get it fixed. But even if we can't get it fixed, we're still going to be upgrading his CPU cooler and cleaning things up. That's the least we could do for holding onto his PC for a few days. Now, one of the first things we need to do is power the system on and attempt to replicate the issues described by the owner. We need to see for ourselves what is going on so that we know where to start with our troubleshooting process. Power is on at the rear. Push the power button up top. Not working. That's really weird though. We're getting an LED light from the CPU fan, but our power button's not working. Huh. That's strange. So the fact that we're seeing lights from peripherals like this fan here tells me that it's probably not a power supply issue. I'm not going to take a ton of time focusing on this side of it. I will check connections though, because if you miswired your front panel, then your power button up front's not gonna work, and you'll think you have a bigger problem than you do. So our graphics card is actually blocking access to the front I/O cabling. This is only an MATX motherboard in here. There's a bit of dead space at the bottom, which is why we can't access it under here. We need to move this graphics card up anyway though. I mean, this full-length 16-lane slot needs to be populated. Doesn't really make much sense unless you're just going purely for aesthetics to have a card this low. And even then I would argue it's not really worth it. So let's first power off the system. I'm gonna move this graphics card up a couple of slots and we'll slide it into this higher slot. I've got to reconnect this CPU cooler, only temporarily of course, because we're swapping it out. The cable was running basically right under the card. There we go. Now this is a standard front panel header, and I can already tell you just by looking at this that he has these pins in the correct spot, assuming he's got polarity correct for this power LED. And he does. So I'm going to put that one back, and then we'll check the power cable. The polarity doesn't matter here, and the power switch is also in the correct spot. Now, there might be a wire compromised here, so what I'm going to do is try to manually jump these two pins with a screwdriver to bypass any sort of imperfection here with this. So power supply switch has been flipped back on. Let's try jumping the two pins. Nothing. Still nothing. Wow. I'm honestly kind of surprised. You can see that if I reconnect this RGB cable for the CPU cooler, right, we're still getting an LED. So at least part of the motherboard is receiving power. It's just not turning on. So we're gonna have to dive quite a bit deeper into this one. So a few things I tried off camera. First off, clearing the CMOS, that takes literally seconds. That did nothing. I took out one of his sticks of RAM. I kept one in the first slot that needs to be populated. Still nothing. I swapped that DIMM with this one here. It's a Corsair module that I know works. Still nothing. So I'm inclined to believe that it's not RAM related and it has nothing to do with his CMOS. The next thing I want to try is ruling out the graphics card as the potential culprit. I'm going to remove this card completely and attempt to power the system on. Now, a lot of these Ryzen CPUs don't have integrated graphics, which means we won't get a picture out, but at this point, I'm only worried about getting power to the system. Like if we can turn the system on, that's mission accomplished in my book, and we can still get to that point without a discrete card in here. So we're gonna remove this next. Now, I'm actually hoping that this doesn't solve the problem, because if it does, that would tell me that it's probably his graphics card, which I think is a worst case scenario in this market. But we still have nothing, no power. That's really, really strange. And just to confirm, we are, let's see, yep, we're still getting power to the RGB fan here from the motherboard. So I think the motherboard's actually okay. It could be something related to power delivery on the socket side, but I'm more inclined at this point to think that it's either the power supply itself, which would still be kind of weird because we're getting power elsewhere. It could be a single rail that's defective, or it could be the CPU. And this is rare. I mean, the CPU is usually not the culprit, but I'm inclined to test it because at this point, we've only got the platform and the power supply to go. But there's still one more thing I want to try before we resort to the scorched earth mentality of removing the CPU, motherboard, and power supply. Those are three of the more labor-intensive parts of troubleshooting a computer, and that's why I save those typically for last. I have removed every single connection from this motherboard, save the 8-pin EPS, which powers the CPU, and the 24-pin, which powers pretty much everything else. I also have this CPU fan here connected, only so that we can see if the system is powering on. I don't think there's an LED indicator on this motherboard. We don't have it plugged into the monitor. We're not going to get picture out anyway because we don't have a discrete card in here. But I also went as far as to remove the custom cable extensions, and the slight chance that these are to blame, although these are pretty straightforward. I mean, top right pin to top right pin, right? You're not creating custom pinouts for these because they're not wired directly into the power supply. But anyway, I removed them just to be on the safe side. We're going to power this back on, and we need to manually jump the two power pins. Still nothing. Wow, this computer is bricked. So we're gonna try the power supply next. This one is a bit easier to swap out than an entire motherboard, if you ask me. We're gonna connect 8-pin EPS, and that's it. That's all we've got. Just two connections, the vital connections. We've removed every other variable, and we're going to connect this power supply to the wall, power it on, and let's see if we get power now. I am expecting that we don't, by the way. I'm going into this, I haven't tried this yet, but I don't think this is gonna be a power supply problem. It doesn't look like a short. It doesn't power on and then turn off. We get steady power at the, at least over the RGB header. So I don't think it's this. I don't think this will fix the issue. Look at there. Nothing. No power still. Wow. These are both connected properly. Yeah. I'm thinking more CPU than motherboard at this point. Maybe he broke a pin installing the CPU. Maybe it's just seated improperly, which is kind of hard to do with AM4, but still, it is possible. So I suppose we'll need to check that out next. So let's remove this CPU cooler. Let's see what we're working with underneath. Again, I don't actually know what CPU this is. It is a, well, this is really nasty thermal paste. I really don't like this stuff. It's like almost like a glue. Oh, that is awful. It is a Ryzen 5 2600. So this thing actually looks to be in pretty good condition despite its age. And it's not very old, relatively speaking, but still, it's not the newest generation. So there is, again, the slight chance that something is wrong with this chip internally, but we have yet to test it. I did check the pins, and the pins look to be fine. I don't see any missing, any bent, and the socket looks good as well. Now, I happen to have a Ryzen 5 2600 that I know works. I'm inclined to swap this one out with the one in his build first to see if this fixes the issue. This would be a bit faster of a troubleshooting step than would be swapping the motherboard out. So yeah, let's get this in there first. Now with my 2600 in the socket, I want to go ahead and try powering things on, but I want to do so with a cooler installed. I don't want to just run this as is, because if this does fix the issue and the system does post now, or at least boot up, that chip will get very hot without a cooler, and I don't want to risk damaging the CPU or the motherboard. So we're going to go ahead and take this chance to install the MSI K360. In the box, we've obviously got the 360mm radiator with the tubes, the all-in-one cooler itself, and we've got 3 120mm RGB fans. Now there are a few really cool traits about the Core Liquid K360. One of the reasons why I'm super excited to upgrade this viewer with this AIO. First off, the block has a built-in LCD, which is customizable. That's really cool. I'm actually gonna peel off this plastic layer here. Ooh, oh, so satisfying. And then the other thing is that the block also has a built-in 60mm Torx fan, which means you can get active cooling to the surrounding VRM MOSFETs, things on your motherboard that need to be cooled, and active cooling always helps. So you're really killing two birds with one stone here. Not only are you cooling the CPU, thanks to the copper cold plate, but you're also getting active cooling around the power delivery aspects of the motherboard. So AIOs that do that, really cool. In my opinion, you don't see too many of them. And the fact that you can customize the screen up top as well is really cool. So let's get this thing installed. We'll set up the socket mount. Another cool thing about this AIO is that you can remove this front cover and you can see what's all going on underneath. So we've got that 60mm Torx fan right underneath the LCD, which is right here. And removing this actually gives you better access to the 4 mounting screws. So this secures the block to the back plate, and now we've got a good solid connection. All right, so with the AIO installed, we've also got the pump connected. I'm not worried about wiring the fans. We're not gonna have the system on for that long. I just wanted some circulation, some way to get heat away from the CPU when it boots up. We're going to connect the system to power again. We've got the 24-pin and the 8-pin EPS ready to go. Let's see if it's the motherboard or the CPU. I'm thinking it's the CPU, but I could be wrong. Wow. Oh, forgot. I didn't wire front IO. Yep, that's my bad. Okay, here we go. Let's try again. There it is. I don't know if you guys can hear that over the lav mic I'm wearing, but that pump is churning. The system is on. Awesome. So my suspicions were correct. He has a dead CPU. So at this point, we're gonna get everything wired up that was originally in his build, again, save the AIO, and we're gonna try for a post, we're gonna try for picture, make sure everything is good to go before we totally jump on the dead CPU train. Again, pretty good feeling, that's what this is. We're gonna reconnect his cable extensions, we're gonna reconnect front IO, which I should have done before inserting the card anyway. And with everything hooked up now, I believe we can try for a post. So power on at the rear. There we go. Nothing will be synced up yet, but we should at least get a picture out, and I'm looking for a post. I think that's possible. I don't think there's any other problem with this build. And there we go. Check it out. Always an awesome feeling seeing a screen like this after a long day of troubleshooting. And this took quite a while, actually, several hours. And I've been kind of cable managing, working things out as we go in the back of this case. There's still quite a bit I need to do. I haven't secured the right panel yet. But I noticed that the motherboard was sending power to a peripheral, which led me to believe that it wasn't likely the motherboard. And because we were getting power to that peripheral, I also believe that it wasn't the power supply. The only other major component that would have prevented the system from actually powering on to any degree was the CPU. And it's such a rare thing, and I've said even in this playlist before, it's very rare that a CPU dies. But when it does, the symptoms should be rather obvious, at least after seeing this video here. Maybe you'll know what to look for. If you're not getting power on at all, but you are getting power to other peripherals, especially through the motherboard itself, might want to start taking aim at the CPU. So with this taken care of, we can power the system off. We'll focus on cable management for this side of things, but then I also want to tackle the 2600, the one that we believe is defective from the system originally. We'll throw that into probably an X470 or X570 motherboard, one that I know will support the 2600 natively, and we'll see if we can get a post with his CPU in that rig. So this is what things look like back here pre-cable management, and this is what it looks like after spending about 20 minutes on it. This is not my best work, but there are so many cables being run in so many different directions, it's difficult to, manage. Now I'm not sure how well you can see this on camera, but this glass is super freaking dirty. So, I mean, it's real gross. You can tell it hasn't been cleaned in a very long time. So we'll clean this up for him. Wow, this is already looking so much better. Get the top and the front panels as well. These are equally as gross. Something about cleaning glass that is just so satisfying. And lastly, we'll finish things off with a quick electric dusting. This build almost qualifies for a deep cleaning in the PCDC playlist, but I was not sent the system to deep clean, so I'll just give it a quick little dusting here. The last thing to do in this video then is confirm that our 2600 from the viewer's rig, the original CPU, is in fact dead. If it's not dead, then I'm not sure what was wrong with it. Maybe it was just improperly seated, though it's again pretty difficult to screw that up with AM4 since the CPUs themselves are keyed. But here we go. We're gonna power this system on. I've got just a GT710 here for video out since the 2600 doesn't have an integrated graphics processor. And the power pins, those are right here. It turns on. Wow. Maybe I should have just tried reseating a CPU before assuming that it was dead. Once swapping it fixed it. Are we getting a friggin' post? I cannot believe this. Oh my gosh. Oh my gosh. All right, well, improperly seated CPU. I don't know what else it could be. Maybe he just had too much mounting pressure over the CPU cooler. I really don't know what else to, I don't know how else to rule this. I mean, the CPU was seated properly. When I took the CPU cooler off, the chip was where it should have been in the socket, right? Again, it's really difficult to mess that part up. And the only other variable I can think of is that maybe there was just too much mounting pressure atop the CPU from the cooler. That has, in the past, and even in my case, more in X299's case than X570 or B550, but still, I have had it where a CPU just isn't detected properly and the system doesn't turn on because the cooler is just not mounted properly. Maybe there's just too much pressure, too little pressure, or whatever. This is really catching me off guard. It's kind of why I'm fumbling my words here. Okay, so look, here's my thought process. This board is a B450M from ASRock. It works natively with 2600s, okay? If it was a BIOS issue, my 2600 wouldn't be working right now, and it has, we've confirmed that, so that's why I try to use as close to an exact match to the CPU as possible, and I just happen to have another 2600 laying around. So mine in there works, it's not a BIOS issue. The wiring, we narrowed it down to just the 8-pin and the 24-pin. No other wiring connected to the motherboard at all. And we tried 2 power supplies and still couldn't get it to post, right? So it's not the power supply, it wasn't wiring, it wasn't user error in that sense. The only other thing that was still installed was the CPU cooler. And of course, in order to get the CPU out, I had to remove the CPU cooler. I didn't think to reapply that CPU cooler onto the same motherboard, but my new CPU, because I didn't expect mounting pressure to be to blame. I'm actually gonna take this a step further now. I'm gonna put his CPU back in his motherboard. I don't know what else to say. I really don't know what else to say. I'm kind of confused. So with his CPU now in this build, power on at the rear. Yep, if you needed any more proof, his CPU is just fine. Well, hasn't this video been one heck of a roller coaster? Really didn't see it turning out this way. I suppose I should be happy that nothing in here was broken. Nothing in here was defective. The CPU was fine. I had growing suspicions that it wasn't, and even concluded at one point in this video that it was actually fried until I went and tested it in another build. And I'm glad I did that, because then I quickly realized that the CPU wasn't actually dead. And then we swapped that CPU back into here, and what do you know, it happens to be working just fine. Like I said, I've run through every possible scenario. I even reconnected the original CPU cooler's fan, thinking, well, maybe that fan shorted something out, prevented the system from turning on. That wasn't the case either. We literally only had the 24 pin and the 8 pin connected, and the CPU cooler connected, and it wouldn't power on. Remove the CPU cooler, replace it with this AIO, and for some reason it now works. That's why I'm thinking mounting pressure, but I can't give you guys a definitive answer, and I'm sorry for that. I feel a bit stupid, I really do. I feel a bit silly in this video. I'm not gonna bother cropping any of this out. I'm not trying to paint myself in any better of a light than I deserve to be. The whole point of this series is to reveal the troubleshooting steps that I run through. Hopefully that helps those who might be in similar positions as this viewer was. And, you know, for this to be a learning process overall. I mean, that's the goal. That's why I say thanks for learning with me at the end of virtually every video, with few exceptions. Again, I'm not trying to make myself look like the hero. I made an assumption. I kind of followed through with that. I was a bit headstrong and a bit premature to assume that the CPU was dead when, in fact, it wasn't. But I don't know. This is just such a strange troubleshooting process. It really didn't end up the way I thought it would. And I'm still kind of confused as to why we saw the symptoms that we did. But nonetheless, the viewer now has a fully functioning build. The build is much cleaner now. It has been cable managed, actually, well, a lot better than it was when it came in, but significantly better than it looked once we connected the 360mm AIO here from MSI. And yeah, I think overall, a really balanced build and a cool red and black and dark gray theme going on. MSI's Core Liquid K360 is a nice addition to this build. Sure, it's a bit overkill for a Ryzen 5 2600. I mean, it's not even a 2600X, it's just a vanilla 2600. But at the end of the day, this viewer could always migrate this AIO to a newer build, a beefier build, something that consumes a bit more power, outputs a bit more heat, and it would just be right up this 360mm AIO's alley. I really dig the integrated screen, the integrated fan, both of which are in this CPU block. It is insane how much they've packed into this block here. And the fans look super sweet as well with their RGB support. You can learn more about it in the link below. I know I said that earlier, but it is one you should strongly consider for your next beefy PC build. So hopefully with this video you were at least somewhat entertained. I'm also hoping that you learned a thing or two, but I'm leaving this one feeling, again, a bit silly. I don't really know what else to say. It's a bit embarrassing. I'm kind of stunned that this ended up playing out the way that it did. Look, we fixed it, but it was a pretty messy process along the way, and I'm still not entirely sure what happened. But at least the viewer can go home happy with a clean system, fully functioning, and with a pretty sweet upgrade courtesy of MSI. If you guys enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up. I would appreciate that. Consider clicking the subscribe button if you have not already. Let me know in the comment section below what you thought of this video and what you'd like to see next, and I will catch you in the next one. My name is Greg. Thanks for learning with me.